Good morning. Thanks for being here. You're listening to Red Line on WDET. I'm Bankole Thompson. This week on the program, we dedicate the entire hour to the future of the Black church in the wake of the South Carolina massacre in which 9 African American lives were taken. For decades, the Black church has been the center of Black life. Last week, President Obama, in eulogizing the Reverend Clemente Pinckney at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, sought to draw on the long tradition of the Black church as the epicenter of the liberation struggle for African Americans. President Obama even sang Amazing Grace to capture the essence of religion as a powerful tool for freedom and justice. So for the entire hour of Red Line, we will look at the past, present, and future of the Black church as it continues to address the wants, needs, and concerns of the Black community, especially after South Carolina. We'll take your calls at 313-577-1019, 313-577-1019. Our distinguished roundtable panel includes the Reverend Jim Perkins, the president of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, the Reverend Lawrence Steve Foster, senior pastor of Calvary Baptist Church, and the Reverend Andre Spivey, senior pastor of St. Paul AME Church and a member of the Detroit City Council. But as we do each week, we begin this morning's conversation with a man who is a second in command of the largest Black Christian denomination in America today. Bishop P.A. Brooks is the first Assistant Presiding Bishop of the Church of God in Christ. On the eve of his assassination, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his last sermon at the Mason Temple Church of God in Christ in Memphis. I'm pleased to welcome to Red Line for the first time Bishop P.A. Brooks. Thank you very much, Bishop, for being here.
I'm delighted and very pleased and honored to be with you today, Mr. Bankole, and certainly I appreciate your Red Line show, which keeps the community aware of issues very pertinent to our well-being.
And I know you're at a conference, but thanks for taking time out to speak to us. You indicated you were at the funeral last week of Reverend Clemente Pinckney at the Emmanuel AME Church. Your reflections, given the decades that you have been in the ministry, if you will, more than 4 decades, your reflections about the funeral itself, the significance of the incident, and what it meant to Black ministers like yourself.
Well, the incident that took place was a very disturbing wake-up call about the sanctity and the security and safety of the house of worship. The fact that this took place in a house of worship, which in America is perceived to be a safe place. But then we see attack in that safe place and the loss of life of those 9 innocent persons who were in Bible study, who welcomed this individual to participate, which is our general posture for persons coming into the place of worship. And of course, the ultimate killing of the pastor. This is very deeply disturbs those of us in ministry and those in the Christian faith. One of the things that I observed in that community as I arrived by plane at 10:30 a.m. on that day, there seemed to have been throughout that region a sense of sorrow. Persons that I met of various races on the street were in tears. Practically everyone I met, regardless of their race, were in tears. And at one point, I stopped at the CNN broadcast booth and van and sat for a moment because we did walk for 5 blocks on our way to the church. It was such a crowd of 10,000 people. And at that moment, a couple just walked up and said to me personally that they just wanted to express their deep and profound regret and a sense of sorrow of what had happened at that time. It was a very moving situation. The atmosphere there is very deeply one of regret.
Right.
And of course, I made a comment. I attended before, when I came back, I attended the Baptist conference. It was held in Detroit.
Right.
And I made a statement that I've heard that the perpetrator had been arrested, but the killer is still running loose. They've arrested the killer, the perpetrator, but that spirit that violent racist spirit is still rampant in America today.
Quite a deeper statement, but Bishop, let me take you back into the church. For those of us who could not attend the funeral, but we watched it across the television screens, one of the things that I noticed was one of perhaps what I call one of the most strongest expressions of solidarity in the church itself, having the first African American president giving the eulogy at a funeral that occupies an important chapter in his presidency.
Absolutely, because our president has really encountered many verbal insults and assaults upon his office and upon him as a person, which is unheard of in the very history of the presidency of this great nation. And it must have had and continues to have that type of negative effect upon the populace. The young man who did this was just a young man of 21 years old. This didn't happen overnight. He was conditioned by his environment. And of course, I thought the president, his response was really so profound, the way he crafted his message around grace. And then that connects also with the fact that those victims, the survivors, were consistently saying, "We forgive you." Wow, just tremendous.
Were you surprised by the response of the victims, the families of the victims, in terms of how they came out in terms of embracing forgiveness?
I was surprised, even though that is the Christian posture. That's our faith, that we are to forgive. Jesus said, "If you do not forgive them, neither will your heavenly Father forgive you." But to see it actually manifested and enacted by victims was really something that was overwhelming to see it, because I think that in America, people are not that forgiving. And I think, but on the other hand,
right,
I think the African American Christian really I think that we practice our faith. Unfortunately, America is really not a Christian nation. It's a sectarian nation.
Bishop, I want to ask you something else. If you're just joining this program, you're listening to Red Line on WDET. I'm Bankole Thompson. This is our special broadcast on the future of the Black Church in the wake of the South Carolina massacre. We have a roundtable here, but we're speaking currently with Bishop P.A. Brooks, the first Assistant Presiding Bishop of the Church of God in Christ, the largest Black Christian denomination in the country. Bishop, on a geopolitical level, the forgiveness demonstrated in Charleston by the families of the victims, I think correlates with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, that after apartheid, there was this move by Nelson Mandela to forgive the perpetrators of the apartheid era.
I believe that it is the spirit and the core of the African American Christian thought of forgiveness. We actually practice that, and aren't we proud of the fact that Nelson Mandela himself, after being in prison for all that time and the abuse that he suffered, and yet he was forgiving, and as a result, he was restored and became the president of that country. I think the world could learn a lesson from the African American faith and the way we are consistent with our biblical ethos of forgiveness. I think that's essential. It's essential, and America needs to revisit that, because if we, as suffering the atrocities and the abuse that we've suffered going back to slavery to this time, and yet we've been very forgiving. We have not been planting bombs. We've not been on a path of revenge and vengeance as we see in other parts of the world. But as a culture, our culture is one of compassion and forgiveness, of which we're very proud that we practice our faith.
What happened in Charleston, does it send any sense of urgency in the Black church across the country?
Absolutely. We are now, and I'm sure this is going to be throughout the African American church community, that we're taking steps for security of our churches and of our people. As a matter of fact, we've been doing some consultations with metal detectors, weapon detectors to install in our churches across the whole metroplex, because this has happened, and I think it sends a message that there's no safe ground now for those persons who are violent and wish to do harm, because the church in the African American community is the mother institution. The church has birthed the business entrepreneurial spirit in our community, banks, schools, you name it. They all were born in the black church. And so that's the last frontier where the African-American experience is concerned.
The last frontier where the African-American experience is concerned. Thank you very much, Bishop Brooks, for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure being with you. You're tremendous and globally appreciated journalist. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bishop P.A. Brooks, first Assistant Presiding Bishop of the Church of God in Christ. You're listening to Red Line on WDET and Bankole Thompson.